What is so cool about pot? Why is everyone so positive and optimistic and cool with pot? It isn't cool. Just so you know, just because all your favorite rappers do it, it doesn't make it cool. You know what's cool is like loving your life. Like what's cool is like being nice to people. What's cool is like having interests and enjoying them. What is cool about sitting around like in sweats all day and bitching about life and being like, I have anxiety and like what is so cool about it? I've never seen anyone smoke pot and go, that guy's a cool guy.
When I first created this channel, I simply wanted to help people who smoked weed all day, every day, and wanted to quit, like myself. But I was quite shocked to find out that the question, is weed addictive, is so debated, so controversial among the addiction community. You have some people saying it's a plant, it's a herb, it's medicinal, you can't be addicted to a plant. You have some people saying that I have anxiety, I have depression, it helps that, so it's not addictive. You have some saying there's no withdrawal effects like other hard drugs like alcohol, heroin, cocaine, etc. So for that reason, weed is not a real addiction.
Weed is a very powerful drug. I don't care who the fuck says it's not a drug, it's a fucking drug. But wow, it really is a drug. It's not just a plant.
I'm gonna say first off, there is a new public acceptance of weed. Weed in the past, from the 60s to 50s, it was kind of taboo. There's always been a community who smokes weed, but it's kind of reserved to the underground, the hippie, stoner, a marginalized section of society. But now, since weed has become legal in a lot of different states, it's pretty much widespread with everybody, whether you're your typical stoner, whether you're a businessman, whether you're a woman, whether you're a college student, whether you are elder. Weed now is accepted across all boards, no matter who you are.
There's more daily users in the US of weed now than there are of alcohol.
Is that for real?
Overtaken, or at least that was the most recent study that I saw. In the US, there are now more daily or near daily marijuana users than daily or near daily alcohol users.
And that thought was just completely, like, if you're a teen right now, you don't understand how preposterous that sounds coming from, like, if you were growing up in the 80s and 90s, like, you were just like, those were like the fringe people almost, you know what I mean? Like, yes, it was popular, but it was not like a respectable person really wasn't doing that. You know, it was like the arts, it was like hippies and yeah, it was, I mean, people thought of it as like the absolute worst thing that could happen. I mean, people from like my dad's generation likened marijuana to heroin. They didn't even see like really a difference. They're just like, you're a junkie. It's like, but what, for smoking a joint? Mm-hmm. And like, yeah, that's the way they viewed it. So the fact that it's that accepted now, it's mind blowing to me.
And then weed has been illegal for so long, and we have states like Las Vegas and Colorado, which were the first to legalize it. It's pretty much like almost half of America now has legalized recreational marijuana use. So you got people smoking who probably, you know, didn't want to take that chance of going to your local street pharmacist, where you can just go to this nice personalized dispensary with nice lighting, nice setting, very professional. So they're more comfortable with going into the store and purchasing weed. There's always been also a comedic acceptance of weed. You know, typically weed is not looked at as a bad thing. It's just, it mellows you out, gives you an appetite, makes you laugh, and it's viewed as being pretty harmless even before this movement of states legalizing marijuana.
I know you don't smoke weed. I know this, but I'm gonna get you high today.
I can do that. I know the rules and regulations. I know I get the blunt. Puff, puff. I see you are aware of the regulations as well.
So I give her a little weed cookie, and then we start playing Scrabble, and then 20 or 30 minutes later, her eyes got all red, and she looked up at me, and she goes, "My mouth is dry." Is that part of the appeal?
I took his papers upstairs to my room. Rolled some weed that I'd hid from the family.
And also with it being legalized now, there's a lot of businessmen that are taking advantage of the legalization of marijuana. Now, back years ago, when you had your weed head or your drug dealer that said, "Oh, weed should be legal," they thought that when weed was legalized, it would become easier for them to sell the drugs that they were per se selling on the streets. But since it is legalized, you have many of these dispensaries are backed by people who have billions or millions of dollars to invest that typically aren't weed heads or typically doesn't have a long history with weed. So you're getting people involved in the world of cannabis that are not so much focused on the health benefits of weed or the benefits to society, but more so just how to make money. So they have pretty much made this a cash cow venture versus your lifelong weed head who just want to get weed out to help people. So in this case, we're getting more strands of weed. We're getting different forms of weed, whether it's edibles, whether it's vape pens, whether it's hash, all these things that are now available. And also, I must mention, do come in or are in a higher potency. Weed back in the 70s actually wasn't as strong as the weed that we have now. And now since we have people who are basically creating these different strains within labs and adding more THC, we're getting a higher potency of weed than what we were once used to.
So the THC concentration, some of these other compounds in it are way more concentrated, so we see a larger effect. So some of the studies that suggest that it's safe, we're talking about, 2 ounces of beer versus 2 ounces of liquor is a very different thing. And marijuana used to be the concentration of beer, and now it's the concentration of like hard liquor.
And then we have our famous people like the Seth Rogans, the Snoop Dogg, the Joe Rogans, these people who are famous and pretty much have an easier professional life to where they can endorse weed or smoke weed all day. So you have these people who are endorsing weed on the TV, and it doesn't translate to your normal average Joe smoke.
You would find life really hard without marijuana.
Yeah, for sure. I smoke weed all day, so I would imagine it would be worse if I didn't.
All day, every day?
Yeah.
Today?
Oh yeah.
After
every
this?
day. Yes, I smoke weed all day, every single day since I was 20 years old, maybe something like that. I mean, in the book and in life, I equate it to shoes or glasses. Like it is, are shoes like a crutch we use, or are they a thing that we have culturally decided make our lives easier and better? That is exactly how weed is to me. Could I not wear shoes? Probably. Could I not smoke weed? Probably. Would I just much rather smoke weed all day? Yes.
Now I'm sure Seth Rogen, who has made all these weed movies, who has money to open dispensaries in California, why not smoke weed? Well, for the person who's working at Walmart who is trying to get ahead but using weed as a daily crutch, maybe that's not best for that person. I want to say the main reason that weed is controversial is because it actually does help people. Now, the biggest debate we have when we say, "Oh, I'm addicted to weed," people will say, "Well, it's not alcohol or it's not hard drugs. Those are real addictions." And weed is a medicine, it's a herb, it helps people. And true enough, it can. If you have autoimmune issues, if you have issues with going to sleep, you have issues where you have had cancer and you don't have an appetite, it does help you regain your appetite. If you're children who have things like epilepsy or these type of illnesses, they have been proven to help in these situations. So weed used as a medication is great, and I would never argue against that weed can't help people. But let's be honest, the millions of people who smoke weed every day aren't smoking it because they have health issues. They're smoking it because they simply just like to get high.
And I can relax at some kind of deeper level of like, the brain's going to do this. The brain's all junk at this point, which is interesting. Also, weed makes me see the world in a really quirky way. And it's kind of like being immersed into like a Lord of the Rings universe where I'm like, whoa, everything's kind of tripped out. And it's just fun. And so that's what I do with weed. I don't understand how people work on weed. Sometimes I'll have really good ideas I quickly write down and later inspect, and they're either nonsense or like, oh, fuck, that really was a good idea. But like when people are like, yeah, man, like I work high, I'm like, what the fuck?
Creative and blah, blah.
But the main effect of cannabis is to narrow attention and focus. It actually can increase attention and focus. Now, the problem is it's not a very good filter, so people can narrowly attend to just video games or just to their anxiety if they're already anxious. That's a problem.
The third thing that I really tend to find when I work with people is the reason that marijuana is a problem is not because it's harmful. The reason that marijuana is a problem is because it's helpful. So the hardest patients that I've had to work with as an addiction psychiatrist are not the ones where they use substances and it makes their life wonderful. The hardest cases to kick are when they use substances and it makes their life normal.
And I am not going to accept anxiety and depression as a reason to smoke weed every day, all day. Anxiety, that's a normal way of life. And also with that argument, the same reason people drink alcohol or hard drugs is due to anxiety and depression. So that excuse is not really legitimate on using weed every day, and that's not truly a real medicinal use for marijuana. And with that being said, I always say weed can actually be the hardest drug to quit. And you say, oh, really? It's not physically addictive. It doesn't tear your life up. How is it really that hard to quit? But it is hard to quit because it's not that bad. You know, if you drink for 5-10 years, it's gonna obviously show, and after a certain period of time you can't hide it. If you are on hard drugs like fentanyl, heroin, these things, it's going to show. You can't hide these things for years and years. But something like weed, you can be a functional weed head where you smoke weed all day, every day, and you are able to function as a normal person in society, and it doesn't really throw you off the rails. So you never actually really consider that you have a real big issue. But something like weed, where you never see that really severe crash in life, it's hard for you to make the decision to even admit you have an issue, and after that in turn actually quit. It's interesting because as much as we try to say there's media evidence that weed is great, there's also evidence that people report that weed is addictive, and people who don't want to quit weed tend to ignore those.
Are you still smoking pot?
No, I'm not actually. I had to stop.
Why?
I was addicted to it.
Really?
Yes.
Were you addicted to it because of an addiction, or you thought you were creating better if you were stoned? Or?
Oh, I mean, this is a very long story. But actually, I've been addicted to various things since I was young.
Right.
And most heavily over the past 7 years.
So a lot of my friends from smoking weed, it's like almost like a depersonalization thing, to where it feels like for the longest time, since I smoked one bad joint, and for the longest time ever since then, it's felt like I've been almost like watching my life happen instead of actually like living it. Does that make sense?
It does.
Use of it because it's now become so widespread in states where it's legal for recreational use. Do you worried about underage children?
Well, underage children shouldn't be putting anything in their lungs. Mm-hmm. Pot smoke or cigarette smoke or any other kind of smoke, if they can help it, it's not good for their lungs, and probably not good for their brains. Let their brains get a little smarter, before they start trying things.
How much weed can I actually smoke and still play a teenage superstar on the Disney Channel? and then
what's the answer to that question?
More than you would fucking think. I remember one time and I don't smoke anymore, and I'm sober.
How long you been sober
but
for?
I've been sober since pretty much the vocal surgery kind of did it for me, because I just learned so much about the effects, which again, you're just not taught.
If you're going through things, like I said, like sleep issues, autoimmune issues, it should be used like a medicine. If it's a medicine shouldn't be used for a lifetime. Maybe you have some doctors say you should, but medicine being used for any extended period of time, for 10-15 years, there's going to be some type of side effects. So we can't isolate weed because it's a medicine like there aren't still side effects that's associated with long-term weed use.
it is very clearly helping people fall asleep faster. And I think that's something that we can come back to in a second. The problem with THC, first, is that you build up a tolerance and a dependence on it, a psychological dependence. And what happens is that when you stop using THC for sleep, not only do you go back to the bad sleep that you were having, because of the dependency, you typically have a withdrawal and your sleep is even worse as a consequence. And if you look at the number one reason why people fail in their attempted abstinence from smoking weed, it's because they can't tolerate the insomnia. So they fall off the wagon and they go right back to using again because they've built up both a physiological and a psychological dependence.
I still find it weird that, we can say things like gambling or your phone or adult content or shopping, even exercise. All these things are addictive that don't necessarily come with side effects once you quit, but there's no debate over whether they're addictive. But weed, for whatever reason, whether we want to say it's a medicine, there's no withdrawal effects, we want to defend weed as if it's this wonder drug, that there are no cons to long-term use. It's going to promote actually worse sleep. You tend to not know how to handle real anxiety, real depression when you're not high. It starts to affect your appetite. And these reasons can also be a reason why we choose not to quit. I didn't want to quit weed for a long period of time, besides me just liking weed, but I noticed when I did not smoke that I wasn't hungry. So I felt like if I did not smoke weed, I was not going to eat. And there are many reasons like those and others that people do continue to use weed from day to day. So we have to stop putting weed in its own separate box as if it's not addictive. There's not an issue with long-term weed use. Now, again, it's better than using alcohol every day. It's better than using fentanyl every day, but it's still an issue, and it could be an issue for you. Some people can have a drink and not take it overboard and be okay. They can drink once a month, once a year, once every 2 months. Some people can smoke weed once a week, once a month, once a year, and it's not a big deal. But certain vices do affect people differently in certain ways. So we can't be so holding over weed that we feel like either it's the person who loves weed and doesn't want to admit they're addicted, or it's a person who has had other issues with alcohol or other drugs and say, oh, it's just weed, that's not addictive. We can't do that. We have to be fair and understand that different things affect people differently. So in ending, is weed addictive? Yes. It's also very dependent on the person. But don't let your disregard for weed or your love of weed prevent you from admitting the truth. And once we start with the truth and work our way after that, our future selves will thank us.